Welcome to Ballot Battleground Nevada. I'm your host, Ben Margiott, a reporter at KRNV News 4 in Reno. I'm passionate about making politics in this critical battleground state more digestible to the average voter and pushing past the talking points to press politicians for answers. On this show, we take deep dives into the people, ideas, and debates shaping Silver State politics. If there was one defining issue of the 2024 presidential election, it was, as it has been in so many cycles in recent political memory, about the economy. The rising cost of living and inflation hit people's wallets directly. And so when a simple campaign promise came along to put money back in people's pockets, it was powerful. President Donald Trump was the first candidate to make the promise last year to end the federal income tax on tips. And from there, it seemed every other politician adopted it as well, especially here in the Silver State, which has the highest concentration of tipped workers in the nation.
We are going to not charge taxes on tips, people making tips.
Eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
It resonated with working class people, and experts believe it's part of the reason he made such significant gains with those voters, winning Nevada and the presidency. Today, that promise has not fallen by the wayside. It is actively being debated, with multiple proposals working their way through Congress. Before it comes up for final consideration, we wanted to take a deep dive on no tax on tips. How would it work? Which workers would it help? And would it be unfair to some? This episode, we've got two representatives from the Culinary Union, the most influential workers' union in the Silver State, which is backing no tax on tips with some caveats. We didn't find an organization, at least in Nevada, formally and actively opposing no tax on tips, but we did bring some of the most common arguments against it to the Culinary. It's clear no tax on tips is great politics, but will it be good policy? Joining us now from the toasty southern end of our state here, two members of the Culinary Union Local 226, the Secretary-Treasurer Ted Pappageorge. Ted, thank you so much for being here, as well as Sebastian Espinoza, an 11-year Culinary Union member. Sebastian, Ted, it's a pleasure to have you guys on Ballot Battleground Nevada. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Ted, why don't you tell me, why are you a Culinary member? Why do you keep fighting for these workers year after year?
Well, I worked in the hotels. My parents worked in the hotels and my family members, and it's very physical work. And all over the country, this kind of work, when it's non-union, are poor people's jobs. And we've been able to change that here in the state of Nevada, and especially in Las Vegas. We've got some work to do in Reno, but especially in Las Vegas, we've been able to create what we call the Las Vegas dream, the ability for folks to have good wages. We've gotten great wage increases recently, our best contracts ever, but also healthcare, so you're not going to go bankrupt when your kids have to go to the doctor, and the ability to own a home is much harder now than it ever was, and that's something we're working very hard on. And retirement, an actual pension. Most true pension plans have gone away, and people are stuck with 401ks, which if you don't have any money to contribute, you're out of luck. And Social Security is all you've got. And Social Security is very important, but we have negotiated a pension plan for our members here in Las Vegas, and we're very proud of that. But the number one thing is really job security, that that these hotels and these big resorts, they get bought and sold all the time. New owners come and go. We deal with real estate investment trust, all sorts of financial vehicles they use to buy and build these properties, and bankruptcies and all sorts of things. And when that happens, a lot of times they tell the workers, sorry, you got to reapply for your jobs, you're out. But that doesn't happen with a union contract. And if you do your job and are accountable and come to work like you're supposed to, then you're secure. And that is the way to be able to build for your family. So, I'm very passionate about this. I've been a union member for 43 years, and I'm blessed also to be able to work with these workers and represent our wonderful members.
Yeah, and for folks who might not know, the union represents 60,000 plus workers, the largest service worker union in the Silver State. Guest room attendants, cocktail waitresses, waiters, food servers, porters, bellmen, and bussers as well. That's what Sebastian does at Caesar's Palace. Sebastian, again, thanks so much for being here. Why is it important for you to be part of the union, and what protections do you have being part of Culinary?
Well, it's very important to me to be part of a union because the work that we put in as union members, and also to have a say, and uh, to have the opportunity to fight for better contracts every 5 years. And when we have issues, we have the opportunity to address them. So that's very important for me because, I used to work multiple jobs, non-union, and it's a different environment walking into a union property from a non-union property. So one, for me, I feel very grateful to be a union member.
Ted, take me back to, you guys probably have supported removing the federal income tax on tips for some time, but when it rose to the national stage last year, and I believe it was former president, now current president Donald Trump, that first mentioned the no tax on tips thing in Las Vegas, what was your reaction to see that proposal get raised on the national stage by a leading contender for president?
Well, that's true. We've been dealing with the issues of taxes on tips for over 30 years. We've negotiated language in our contracts that requires the companies to sit down with us in a subcommittee to tell us how they create tip allocation rates and show us the data. It's all confidential. We sat at the table for years and years with the IRS, and we've asked our elected officials. Senator Harry Reid was a force to help us fight back, to just make sure people get treated fairly as tip earners. That's always an issue when you're dealing with the IRS. And we feel that Vegas and Nevada overall is a target for the IRS, and has been. More recently, Congressman Stephen Horsford has sat with our members at the table across from the IRS and banging away on this issue of tip allocation rates. And our entire delegation, Senator Masto and Senator Rosen, and Congressman Horsford and Titus, and also Susie Lee, we helped us. We got a 60% reduction in tip allocation rates through the pandemic.
Wow.
But what happened is that they came back like gangbusters, and when that expired, not only that expired, but also just a ratchet up that was just, we felt very unreasonable. And so that's been an issue. We've been at the forefront for a long time now. President Trump threw it out there. He was in a rally running for president, and he was making all sorts of promises about cutting everybody's taxes, especially the billionaires. And but what happened is he threw out this idea of no taxes on tips, and when we heard that, we were our members were very skeptical because it's election time. We've heard a lot of promises. But at the time, we made a decision as a union that we would support that. And we also talked to our Democratic federal delegation, and every one of them, and Senator Masto, Rosen, Congressman Horsford especially, jumped on board and said, okay, let's try to hold people's feet to the fire on this. And if you remember, Vice President Harris endorsed it when she came to the state. So something that had been long time decided in the courts now had new life. And at the end of the day, we do think it makes sense. But the key thing is this is a working class issue. The issue of some relief for workers that make tips. It's not about helping billionaires and millionaires and the bosses. It's about helping regular workers all over the country. There's over 5 million tip earners, I think. What's happened is that the promises to reduce the cost of living from Trump and the Republicans really has disappeared. We haven't seen anything on that. It's culture wars and going after immigrants and a bunch of other stuff across, overseas. This is one thing that it has life, and it is something that we're demanding that these Republicans that control, all the three phases of government right now keep their promise. And there's several different versions of it out there right now.
We'll get into those in just a minute. Sebastian, I mean, what was your reaction when you heard no tax on tips start to gain momentum last year? And how much of your income do you receive from tips? And not having to pay taxes on that money, how much of a difference might that make in your financial situation?
Well, it would be a big difference because I didn't realize how big of an issue it was until I heard the conversation amongst my coworkers of what the difference of their checks would be. And it goes from a few $100s. And if you add that up in a month, add that up in a year, we can start relying on our checks because we don't right now as tip earners. We rely a lot on our income, on what we earn on a week on tips to budget out our finances for the upcoming months, previous months, and to plan out our future. So we heard that it's finally in the Senate for discussion, it still kind of feels like a dream we're talking about. And if this goes through, it's going to affect thousands here in Las Vegas. Just the lifestyle of, worrying about if you're going to make a good week on tips, a good month on tips, because tips are never promised. You can do everything right, but it doesn't mean you're going to get what you expect from the service we provide. So it's a life-changing bill here in Las Vegas.
Ted, pull back the curtain for us a little bit. I mean, you guys have 60,000 members, primarily down in the Las Vegas area. What percentage of your union members get tips, whether that's directly or indirectly through like tip sharing agreements? How would this affect kind of your member base?
Well, based on the IRS, you've got to identify tipped or non-tipped work. And there's incidental tips that might happen if you're a room cleaner, like a guest room attendant, that, if they make a few dollars here and there, that's considered incidental, incremental. Doesn't qualify you as being in a tip position. But, the folks that work in our restaurants and also work on our casino floors, bartenders, cocktail servers, the folks that are outside the front service, like bellmen, doormen, et cetera, bell starters, that all of those folks are classified as tip earners by the IRS, and the IRS requires a tip allocation rate. And you heard Sebastian say sometimes that rate, if you do better than most, then it might wipe out your check that just taxes. So this isn't some sort of a panacea here, but it is something that when you talk about tip earners, and we have many good jobs that are, in our gourmet rooms that are union. But then there's a lot of other jobs that aren't necessarily those. And when you look all over the country, when you talk to workers that make tips, one of the big problems is that you can pay a tip earner, an employer can pay as little as $2.13 an hour all over this country. 44 states in the country have a sub minimum wage. The federal sub minimum wage that is allowed by the federal law for tip earners is $2.13 an hour. Now, we fought that and never allowed that to happen here. This union is responsible, working hard to make sure that Nevada is one of the 6 states that doesn't have that sub-minimum wage. But if you work in the state of Pennsylvania, for example, in the city of Philadelphia, they've upped the minimum wage to $7 or $8 an hour. But everywhere else in the state of Pennsylvania, if you're a tip earner, you're making $2.13 an hour. So if you're able to help folks like that, and also, or help folks here that work in the coffee shops or elsewhere, in addition to the folks that are earning a living in some of the nicer restaurants, you're helping people pay their rent, save for their homes, pay their grocery bills. And so we're 100% in support of this thing, but it's in various versions right now on both sides, in the House and the Senate. But we think there's a moment here, and we're very vocal about demanding that at least on this one issue, we haven't seen any activity out of Congress that is run by the Republicans right now on, the cost of groceries, the cost of rent, the cost of homes, the cost of living issues out there. But this is one issue that affects the average workers and affects their cost of living. And so we're going to fight very hard to try to get something through.
And I'll summarize a couple of the different proposals that are floating around right now. And Ted, correct me if I'm getting any of the details wrong here. But House Republicans put the no tax on tips language in the one big beautiful bill that passed and is now being considered by the Senate right now. Remains to be seen if that will make it into the final language. But it would allow people to claim a tax deduction on qualified tips, including cash charged or received as part of the tip sharing agreements from 2025 through 2028, and it would limit the tax break to tipped work in jobs, that had customarily and regularly gotten tips already. Separate and apart from that, Senator Jackie Rosen, Senator Ted Cruz, the Republican, and others have passed a standalone bipartisan no tax on tip act through unanimous consent in the Senate. That bill is now in the House. Remains to be seen if that bill moves forward either. I mean, do you guys have a preference? Are there any major differences between these two major proposals, Ted? And do you have a preference, one or the other?
Well, there's actually three out there, and with Congressman Stephen Horsford's bill on the House side, and you're right, though, the House passed the reconciliation bill with the provision in there that the Republicans supported. The problem with the House version is that it's temporary. It sunsets, I believe, after 3 years. On the Senate side, like this was actually one of the benefits of having some senior senators at work. Senator Rosen passed a proposed resolution, and with Republican Senator Ted Cruz's bill, and it passed separate. And so, if there is an opportunity here that because the reconciliation bill, we call it the one big horrible bill, and there's all sorts of bad stuff in there about cutting healthcare and cutting funding. And there's going to be a real brawl on this and a lot of pressure on a lot of these swing state Republicans that are already rebelling. Either they're on the extreme and they believe it's not tough enough that they need to cut more healthcare, or they're on the moderate side and they're quite concerned that it's going to damage their election. So the Republicans are really struggling at the end of the day on this. So because Senator Rosen made that proposal and got it passed along with Senator Cruz on the Senate side, there's a possibility of a standalone bill that gets through. It really only goes up to $25,000 in tips, and it works as a tax credit. So there's quite a significant limit on that. But it would be very helpful, and it would be a start, something that we haven't seen before. But Congressman Horsford's bill in the Assembly that did not pass in the House is much more clear, because one of the things that are important is to restrict it to tip earning classification. So the way the one in the Senate was written, it was so broadly that the Treasury could decide that somebody like a Wall Street banker could convert their pay to gratuities and claim no taxes. And it's not clear. It has some very broad language about controlling that. Congressman Horsford's language is very clear about specific tip earning classifications. It also means that you still declare and you still pay your FICA, payroll, Social Security taxes, so that you don't lose out on your Social Security. You don't. You also have the ability to qualify for loans, but it just gives you the tax break. That's in the Horsford bill. So if this big horrible bill gets hung up and our no taxes for tips gets kind of potentially hung up in that, there is an opportunity for that to be passed separately. And especially if the Republicans are willing to talk to Democrats on this issue to make sure it has the proper protections. So there is, who knows what happens when the sausage gets made. But again, we're holding politicians' feet to the fire to keep the promise on this one. And we're going to try to work hard to work it through.
One of the arguments that you will hear against this proposal is that more than a third of tipped workers, at least as of 2022, had incomes lower than the threshold that they would qualify. They wouldn't have paid federal income tax in that year because they just didn't make enough money. Is that the same for your union membership? I mean, is there a significant portion of union members that wouldn't earn enough to have to pay taxes and then qualify for this? Or
Well, first of all, I would say a lot of those talking heads out there and economists never work for tips, and they certainly never work for $2.13 an hour, which folks have had to do all over this country. And so one of the things that Congressman Horsford's bill, it eliminates the sub minimum wage. That means that a tip earner would have to pay them the minimum federal minimum wage, which is only $7.20 an hour, I think. So $7.15, $7.20 an hour. So that is another example of something that if you're a tip earner and you're one of those tip earners that don't qualify, for example, you already don't have you don't have enough tips that you make for a deduction, but your pay rate goes from $2.13 an hour to $7 an hour. $5 an hour makes a big difference for you. You're able to buy your groceries. You're able to help pay your rent. You're able to help take care of your kids. So here in Las Vegas, though, we don't have that sub minimum wage. And I would just say that in Las Vegas, it absolutely helps most, if not all, of our tip earners. It's the union ones for sure, their income is in that bracket where this deduction would be extremely helpful. And same thing with our members in Reno.
would you guys see tips as income?
Sure. The problem is it's not steady income. Now, a lot of folks have forgotten the idea that tips are considered income was settled in the courts because in the 80s, Ronald Reagan's administration was the first to pass the laws that tips were to be taxed. So the idea that tips are considered fully taxed just like hourly income is not etched in stone. It's something that has been in place, and the laws that were passed at the time were challenged in court, and we lost those court challenges. The problem with tips, you heard from Sebastian, you just don't know. And especially now, most people are not carrying cash. So if you're in a restaurant, maybe somebody can use their credit card. But if you're on the casino floor, it's a different ballgame. Or you're out on the drive, as a baggage handler or a bellman, it's a different ballgame now. So we think that this resonated with working class voters in a big way, because if you're not a tip earner, you know people who are. And the truth is they're getting squeezed like everybody else with these high inflation we've dealt with the last few years, and essentially price gouging and collusion by these just giant corporations, Wall Street landlords buying up our homes throughout the state of Nevada and all through the Sun Belt in this country. It's just the squeeze is on, and we've got to demand that politicians respect working class voters and stand up for them.
And then another argument that I also have to bring up is kind of this fairness argument where people will say there are plenty of service workers that are in jobs that do not get tips. And so, if tips are income, why should my income be taxed and your income not be taxed is an argument that you will hear. How would you respond to that?
Well, look, that's a divide and conquer by the rich that will always fight against any sort of tax break like this. But I think that at the end of the day, our position is that the folks that don't make tips, companies just need to pay them more. They need to pay them a fair wage. And that's what we've done in our contracts. We've got the largest wage increases for our non-tip earners that we've ever did in history. And we fought very hard here in Las Vegas, and we're going to have contract negotiations next year with our union properties and in Reno. And we plan to organize in Reno because they're behind in Reno. The casino workers are behind big time. So we don't accept that argument. We think that if there's an opportunity to help some workers, then these politicians need to keep their promises and do it.
And then as we wrap up here, what's in place? You mentioned in the Horsford bill, there are some rules and regulations to prevent a big CEO or an executive from just saying, hey, my bonus is now a tip and not paying taxes on that. Are there only those protections in the Horsford version of the bill? And would you guys still support it at the end of the day if there aren't those regulations in effect?
They're more clearly laid out in the Horsford bill. They're very broadly written as guidelines that are going to be determined by the Treasury in the reconciliation bill and in the cruise bill. But at the end of the day, what we're going to do is push these politicians to keep their promise, but also do the right thing for working class voters to not just simply send something that is in name only and a big cash grab for rich, Wall Street bankers or something like that. So if it comes through without those protections, we'll support it. But we're then we're gonna have to be very vigilant to make sure that the people that it's intended for actually get the tax breaks. And I think that these politicians, this is a very close victory. And so you've got Republicans that are controlling the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and there's always a tendency to overreach. And I think voters are going to be watching. They're watching very closely when you see the Marines getting sent out to, arrest landscapers and dishwashers. We're concerned about tariffs because of the economy here and the service industry. And I think something like this, voters are going to pay close attention to it. So there's a lot of pressure on the Republicans to make sure that this benefit is for working class folks like it's supposed to be.
As we kind of conclude here and bring Sebastian back into the conversation, you're working hard every single day for tips over there at Caesar's Palace. It's backbreaking work, difficult work. We were chatting off mic about kind of the toll that it takes on your body, and you earn those tips, no doubt. What would it mean to you next year, or fast forward a little bit down the line, to be able to have those tips be 100% yours and not have to pay taxes on those?
That means I can steadily budget my future, because my next step to plan out my future is to get a house. And, I don't want an extravagant house, but, a house with pool, a fence, the American dream. And that becomes a little bit more of a reality once I can get all my paycheck without the tax on tips.
And finally, I have to ask, you guys probably see everything inside those casinos. What's the craziest thing you've seen at Caesar's Palace lately, or something that people would be surprised to learn about how this industry works?
I would say this. I would say a lot of celebrity chefs are nicer than you think. And I think that's always the expectations that, chef life, this mentality. They'd be really surprised.
Interesting. Good to know, for sure. Yeah, the Gordon Ramsays of the world are probably making it through Las Vegas quite a bit.
Yeah.
Sebastian Espinoza, busser at Caesar's Palace, Culinary Union member, and Ted Pappageorge, the secretary treasurer of the Culinary. Thank you guys both for being here. We really appreciate getting some of your time. Sebastian, will let you get back to the Strip.
All right. Thank you. You have a good day.
Good. Thanks.
A special thank you to Ted and Sebastian for joining Ballot Battleground Nevada this week. Before we let you go this week, I have a favor to ask. Ballot Battleground Nevada was nominated for the Reno News and Review's Best of Northern Nevada Awards, specifically the Best Local Podcast Award. Voting is open now. It runs through Sunday, July 20th. If you've enjoyed this show, if you've learned something from it, I would be honored if you voted for Ballot Battleground Nevada for Best Local Podcast. Voting runs through Sunday, July 20th. We'll put a link in the show notes. If you made it to the end of this episode, I really appreciate it. If you have guest ideas, episode ideas, questions, comments, compliments, concerns, I want to hear from you. Feel free to shoot me an email to bjmargiott, Margiott, at sbgtv.com, and just put Ballot Battleground Nevada in the subject line. And if you have a minute, please leave a rating and a review if you like the show. That helps the podcast show up higher in searches so more people can discover Ballot Battleground Nevada. Thanks for listening.